know that financial literacy was touted as a means of economic progress and freedom in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War? Have y'all heard of the Freedmen's Bank? Have you? And if not, I wonder if you know what its history can teach us about John Hope Bryant's contention that banks don't care about color. Well, I'm glad you are curious because we're talking about all of it after the break.
Brokers, welcome to another episode of Brokish, where we talk about the unbelievable ish this country has done to keep us broke. Now here are your hosts, Amber and Erika.
Hello, brokers. I'm Amber.
And I'm Erika.
And today on Brokish, guys, we are talking about the myth that banks don't care what color you are.
Shared by our favorite guest ever, John Hope Bryant.
I feel like we are, you know how like Donald Trump gets thorns in his side about people and he'll just like rag on them for like an extended period of time.
You're not going to compare us to Trump in any way. You're not going to compare us to Trump in any way. I'm not accepting that. The devil is a lie today and tomorrow. No, get another metaphor.
Well, we are back talking today to enlighten the people about the fact that banks do indeed see color. And it's not just green. And they've seen more than green for a long, long time. But before we start the conversation, Erika, you know what everybody wants to know.
No, before we even get there, I have to give my shout out that this episode of Brokish is sponsored in part by the J. Nelson Institute for Women's Leadership at Texas Women's University and their Quality Enhancement Program. I want to thank them for their support of my work and willingness to fund efforts in public scholarship. So there you go.
Did Daryl help you prepare for that?
Look, I can write my own commercials. Was it professional?
I mean, yes, it was giving. It was giving.
It sound? Did I make it seem like they were gonna give me some more money? Like that's really what we need these people to do.
Listen, it was giving. It was giving. You did a good job.
Thank you. Now I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were asking what the people are interested in knowing.
I mean, we all want to know, how did the chutney turn out?
First of all, it is homemade cranberry sauce. It's not chutney. You don't have to be ugly. And there were actually people who showed up on YouTube in the comments. They were like, Erika, drop the recipe. Because see, you were hating. You were like, nobody wants it. And I was like, yes, they do. And I had a couple requests for the recipe and I gave it to them because it's not my recipe. It's actually Alex Gornishelli's recipe. So you can look on it. Google Alex Gornishelli cranberry sauce.
I know who Alex Gornishelli is.
No, I'm saying for the recipe. Google her and the recipe, and then you'll find it. Because I know secretly you want some, and I forgot to freeze some for you, so you can make some by yourself.
I'm good, because actually I don't eat cranberry sauce. That's my dirty secret. I don't need none of that. I just want some dressing and some Ghibli gravy. I don't need none of that.
Mm-mm. Well, you will also be very happy to know, Amber, that my food was so good this year. Like my food, from top to bottom, everything was delicious. We did a great job because my daughters helped me. And so we did a very good job with our food this year.
I'm really, really happy for you. I'm very proud to know that because I know that you don't love cooking. And so
at all.
I'm glad the ancestors carried you over the finish line and you finished.
Oh my goodness.
Well.
Yes.
I love that for you.
To the people, there were also people, there were like a couple, maybe it was one person in the comments like, oh my God, I can't believe y'all get on here and talk about feeding your family salt and sugar and fat. And it's like, y'all need to go outside. As the people say, y'all need to touch grass because it's like not that deep. You don't eat this every day, right? Like, stop it. Stop it.
We also live in the United States. So, I mean, we can
Listeria here.
I know. Or we can eat the fake organic chicken, or we can eat the real organic chicken. That also is fake as well. Like, I mean, it's not like we have,
food safety,
all these lovely options. Exactly. So anyway.
Enough about me. What have you been up to, Amber?
Well, y'all know I just been living my best unemployed life.
They call it fun employment. You do
I know, yes.
employment?
Yes, I've been, yes, unemployed. We had Thanksgiving. I cooked for 3 days, and y'all, one of the African Americans at my house stole my plate.
Somebody
Stole my
walked out
plate.
with your dishes?
No, with my plate of food. So I fixed my
Oh,
plate. And then, people was worrying me because they was in my house, like, where's this, where's that? So I said, you know what, I'm gonna eat later. So I wrapped my plate up in some
you don't have a
foil.
staff to do that for you, Amber? I thought.
Now this lady asking me
Sorry.
about fun employment, asked me, do I have a staff? Child, please. Anyway, so I wrapped my little plate up in some foil. I sat it on my kitchen island. I said, well, I'm gonna eat my plate later. So at the end of the night, I walk my happy African American ass back in the kitchen, thinking I'm finna get my plate, and y'all, somebody swiped my plate. Swiped it.
Swiper.
Swiped it. And I have a cousin every year. He takes all the leftovers and he feeds unhoused people because he passes
Okay.
a large encampment on his way home. And so we had gave him like really almost all the food. So I mean, I got me some ham and I got me a couple of bites. But y'all, I cooked for 3 days and I ain't even get a plate.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Amber. I hate that
That's
for
all
you.
right. That's
Did
okay.
you find out from the group chat who did it?
No, I don't even have the heart to ask because I don't want to never talk to somebody in my family again over my Thanksgiving plate.
Okay,
So
that's fair.
I didn't ask. But my plate was missing. And one of y'all got my plate. And y'all know that wasn't your plate. Because I told y'all specifically don't use my foil. So my plate had foil on it. I had to go boxes for the rest of my family. So I bought to go boxes because see I had good foil because Sam's had a sale on foil. So I had actual Reynolds wrap, not the Walmart foil. So I told them don't use my foil. So they knew that wasn't their plate because my plate had foil on it. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I'm so sorry about that, but I do have
Thank
some
you.
things that I froze, so you can come over and have some of my food if you want to.
Well, thank you. I would love some food, but you got to make some more chutney so I can get the whole experience.
No problem. It only takes 15 minutes. No problem.
Okay. Yes.
But y'all, we are very excited today because we have a guest on the show with us. And before I bring up our guest, I want to just give a shout out to good white people. Like, I'm going to give a shout out to good white people. And the reason I'm doing that is because we learned about and met our guest from who I call him a friend to the show. He's been on the show a couple times, and his name is Dr. Calvin Schermerhorn. If you all didn't see Dr. Schermerhorn's interviews that we had with him, he's from Arizona State University, and he's a historian, but he's also just a good dude. And this man wrote a letter for me to get into graduate school, even though he doesn't know me from a can of paint. And he does stuff like this. He puts us in touch with people. And so I just shout out to Dr. Schermerhorn. I appreciate him always. And so, because of Dr. Schermerhorn, we have with us today Dr. Justene Hill-Edwards. And she is an associate professor of history at the University of Virginia. She's a 2022 Andrew Carnegie Fellow and a current Mellon New Directions Fellow. And she's a specialist in African American history, and her research examines Black economic life in America, just like we do. And she is the author of Savings and Trust, The Rise and Betrayal of the Freedmen's Bank. And so that's her new book. And in the book, she explores the rise and the tragic failure of the Freedmen's Bank and considers the ways in which the bank's collapse has shaped racial and economic inequality in America. Imagine that stuff that happened back then, Amber, still is shaping what's happening today. Who gonna tell
Erica,
John Hope Bryant? Who gonna tell him?
the only color people care about is green. You stop being foolish. You stop it. You
I'm
stop it.
sorry. Let me finish getting through her bio.
Okay.
She is also the author of Unfree Markets, The Slaves Economy, and the Rise of Capitalism in South Carolina. Always highlighting the lives of enslaved and formerly enslaved people, Hill-Edwards studies the relationship between economic and political freedom for people of African descent in the United States. Come on, liberation. Dr. Hill-Edwards, welcome to Brokish.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you both.
Yeah, so, or maybe you don't know, but Amber and I are, genteel Southern women. And so in that Southern tradition, we have to first ask you who you and who your people are. Like we got to know this first.
Well, my husband is from the South, from Texas, so I do get it. Let's see. I am originally from Oakland, California, born and raised. I Let's see. It's a hard question. Yeah, born in Oakland to a single mom. Shout out, mom. Hi. And born very working class. Um, I In terms of kind of how I connect to the topic of your podcast and kind of the work that I do in African American history. I've only recently come to understand that I've always wondered just about money and about wealth. How are there people in this country who have more and have less, and why disproportionately did I see those with less looking like me, Black and brown people? And so I was fortunate to go to boarding school when I was in high school when I was 14, and that dramatically shifted my life, how I thought about my trajectory, how I thought about what was possible for a Black girl from Northern California, from Oakland, born to a single mother. And it changed my life. I was one of a handful of students of color, and I did pretty well there. And I think that kind of changed my trajectory. I went to Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, small liberal arts college, where it was a really great experience. Again, it was incredibly challenging. And from Swarthmore, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I was.
Oh, who wants to do? I'm sorry, Amber's a lawyer. That's not the reason I'm saying that.
I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I wanted to practice law. So instead of just jumping to law school, I worked at a law firm in Philadelphia for 2 years, and I hated it.
Fair. Fair.
And I realized, I had an epiphany. I was probably 22, 23. And I said, if I'm going to work this hard, it might as well be at something that I really enjoyed and really wanted to enjoy. I thought back to the classes that I really enjoyed. I was a Spanish major in college, but I took a lot of Black studies classes. And those were the classes that I really felt engaged by and with. So I chose to pursue that. And so I got a master's in African diaspora studies from Florida International University in Miami. And that was a wonderful change from being in Philly. And then I went on to do a PhD at Princeton, where I focused on African American history and really started to look at this intersection between the rise of slavery in the US and the rise of capitalism. That led to my first book when I started here as an assistant professor at UVA. And it is the focus of what I teach. It's the focus of my research. It's what I speak on. And that informed how I approached and why I chose to write my second book on the history of the Freedmen's Bank.
Well, thank you for all that. That's amazing. And I love how at the end, it all comes together.
I tried.
But when we were emailing, I mentioned to you that, we had this guest on our show, and for me, it was a bit of a nightmare. And before he came on, we knew that there were some ideological differences, but Amber and I were like, let's just talk to him. Let's see what kind of connections that we could find. Well, basically, we learned that there were none. So instead of us being like real mad about all the things that were happening, we were like, you know what? We are just going to debunk all of the madness this season. And so for today's show, like Amber mentioned earlier, we are looking at this idea that banks don't care what color you are. That was what our guest, John Hope Bryant, shared with us, that they don't care. They're just interested in green. They're not interested in color. They're interested in race. And so in your book, Savings and Trust, The Rise and Betrayal of the Freedmen's Bank, one of the things that I think that you endeavor to do in that book is to make that connections between Black economic disenfranchisement, like, the racial wealth gap, all of those sorts of things with the failure of the Freedmen's Bank. Mm-hmm. And so let's kind of take it step by step, right? For the brokers, that's what we call the folks who listen to our show. For the brokers, you're a historian. let's talk about the history lesson. So teach us all about the Freedmen's Bank,
Sure.
and why it was established, what it was meant to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the history of the Freedmen's Bank, I think, is just so fascinating, and hopefully that comes through in the book. So it was established on March 3rd, 1865, and it was the brainchild of a white abolitionist minister from the North named John Alvord, and he was not a banker. He didn't really know much about finance. One might even say that he wasn't a good steward of even his family's own finances, because when the bank was established, he and his family were essentially in dire financial straits. Um, he worked for the Union Army during the Civil War, and in 1864 in particular, he was following Sherman's army as they were making their very important and dramatic march to the sea from Atlanta to Savannah. And during that time, he took the opportunity to speak with communities of recently emancipated African Americans. He wanted to know what their lives were like in slavery. He wanted to know what they were looking forward to in this new but unstable period of freedom. And overwhelmingly, what they told him was that they wanted, one, of course, to reunite with their families, but they also wanted the opportunity to buy land, and importantly, to have their land claims protected by the federal government. And so he travels to New York in January of 1865, and he gathers a who's who of white Republicans who lived in and around New York. He gathered abolitionists, philanthropists, bankers, politicians, and he encouraged them to support his proposal to create the Freedman Savings and Trust Company, also known as the Freedmen's Bank. And so this is an important part of the story that I think even historians really underestimate. Yes, you have whites in the North, Republicans who are supportive of Lincoln. They were creating a financial institution for African Americans, but they didn't fully understand that, especially the recently emancipated weren't coming to the table devoid of knowledge about money, right? They knew about money when they were slaves, when they were enslaved. They were saving money, making money, earning money, trading goods, selling goods to their enslavers, buying goods from their enslavers, buying and trading and selling goods with poor whites, buying and selling food, clothing, uh, liquor, tobacco with other enslaved people. And so they weren't coming to this period of freedom completely devoid of knowledge about, one, how to save, and two, about the importance of money. They may not have had kind of sophisticated understandings of finance, which most Americans
Who
didn't,
did?
right? But they were coming to the table with fundamental understandings about what money could do for them and what savings could do for them. As I say in the book, their knowledge of finance, their knowledge of money, however, which was forged through the violence of slavery. And so that's important to remember, right? And so the Freedmen's Bank was established in this period towards the tail end of the war to essentially help African Americans have a vehicle to save. And their goal in saving, African Americans' goal in saving, was to save enough money to do things like buy land, buy machinery, move to be with their families. And so this was their goal in investing and depositing money in the Freedmen's Bank, especially in its first few years.
I also want to talk about, as we sort of round that corner, because I think it's really important when we sort of talk about race neutrality in banking, that
Mm,
the people at the table were abolitionists, but they were not people who were proponents of equality, right?
yes.
They did not recognize or acknowledge a total humanity or equality between black and white people. And one of the things I thought was interesting that I'd like you to speak about is sort of this emphasis on creating vehicles for saving, based on the earnings of black people as laborers, while sort of overlooking their desire to own the means of production within their
Mm,
own communities.
sure.
And and how we see that sort of still reverberating today, and how financial products are sold to us, and what is emphasized to us and what's offered to us as a community.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to note, I mean, we are talking again about the 1860s and 1870s. And even though white progressives, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
There's something else we can hear.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's good. So even though white Republicans were supportive of the bank, even supportive of Lincoln, they may not have necessarily been in favor of equality, of especially political equality between white and Black Americans. And that's important to remember here, right? African American inclusion in the body politic, according to many white progressives, as we might call them, they didn't necessarily believe that African Americans should be automatically included in the body politic as voters, as kind of participants in the broader American economy. And so this is, I think, one of the interesting parts of looking at the history of the Freedmen's Bank, is it gives us one institution in which we see all of these topics play out.
And another thing that was interesting to me from the book, and sort of this desire of Black people to have American citizenship. And I think about that sometimes in my own work. It feels like we're doing all of these things because we're trying to get it. And so don't none of y'all come in these YouTube comments from what I'm about to say, but listen to what I'm about to say. So Dr. Hill-Edwards, if you're familiar with ADOS or the ADOS movement, American Descendants of Slavery, I think that for a lot of people are like, oh my God, ADOS, we don't understand how it happens. And I feel like for many Black people, there's just like this allure to have, for acknowledgement of what our ancestors went through, for us to act. When are we actually going to fully be citizens? And I think that that's why that movement resonates with so many people. But in the book you wrote, African Americans used the bank to test whether the federal government would make good on the promise to protect freed people and extend them citizenship and voting rights. And with the failure of the bank and all the other failures that have come after that, like, why should we even trust the US government to protect our citizenship? Have we ever really even had it? Or all of the other rights that I think we're just like struggling for them to protect, but they always seem to fail to do?
No, it's a really good question. And I think in many ways, and this is an unfortunate reality, I think being Black in America means constantly having to fight for citizenship rights, fight for the right for the federal government to protect our interests. And I think that is inherent in the Black experience, whether it's a good thing or not. I think it's reality. And if history has told us anything, if history has told us anything, I think it is the fact that I think in a democracy in general, you constantly have to fight for your civil and political rights. And even more so if you have been historically pushed out of access to those types of rights and privileges. And so I think, unfortunately, it is a major feature of being Black in America, constantly having to fight for, to advocate for our political, economic, and legal rights. I think it is a defining feature of being a descendant of enslaved communities in the US.
And I hate that for us because it's just on top of all the other things, right? That we have to continue to do that. But it's interesting to me, especially I think people who are talking about the neutrality of banking or color blindness in banking, they're always like, it's about, it's always about money and it's never about anything else. But one of the really interesting things for me in reading your book that I did not know is that it might be easy to assume that the Freedmen's Bank was a failure because you were dealing with poor Black people, right? Like that was the reason why the bank didn't work out, because you were dealing with a Black community that was trying to build up all of these resources, and that those resources were constrained. And not that they weren't. But can you just tell us about the history of the failure of the Freedmen's Bank and who the villain in the story really was?
Sure. Yeah. And this, I think, is the sad part of the story. So the bank was established with just a handful of branches at first. And in its first 3 to 4 years, the bank grew to about 20 branches. And at its height, the bank had opened about 37 branches across 17 states. Now, practically, what this meant is that each branch needed an operating budget. A cashier had to be paid. Space had to be rented or purchased. And so, each branch had a certain number of operating expenses that ultimately trickled down to expenses that depositors had to pay with their money. And so with this rapid expansion, with a shift of the administrative structure of the bank, in comes in 1867, a man named Henry Cook. And Henry Cook was the brother of famed investment banker Jay Cook. And Jay Cook and his brother established Jay Cook and Company. And this was the first investment bank in American history. Now, Jay and Henry Cook had cultivated very strong political ties with members of the Lincoln administration, including Lincoln himself. And they were responsible for raising money for the Union's war effort in the early part of the Civil War. And so they had curried a lot of favor with the Department of War, with the Department of Treasury. They were close personal friends with Salmon P. Chase, who was the Treasury Secretary and then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And so we are talking about a very small cabal of men who were politically connected, economically very wealthy, and willing to take risks ultimately with the deposits of African Americans. And so they start chipping away at the bank's benevolent mission. And so the first illegal loan is made in 1867 to a man who would become the bank's actuary. Now, it's important to note that the Freedmen's Bank was established as just a pure savings bank. It was supposed to receive deposits. It was supposed to offer a small amount of interest on those deposits. A third of the deposits were supposed to be invested in government bonds and securities. And these investment products were seen as being very low risk and very stable. And so again, the bank was supposed to operate just like a simple savings bank. But when the bank makes this loan in 1867, it starts to chip away at that fundamental benevolent mission. And the bank, led by Henry Cook, changes its charter. And so in 1870, the bank is chartered. Congress approves an amendment to the bank's charter, essentially allowing it to operate as a commercial bank. So it starts to make loans. Now, this is where things get really tricky. Between 1870 and 1873, kind of shifting into the beginning of January 1874, the bank makes about $3.5 million of loans. About 95% of that loan volume went to white borrowers in and around DC. The majority of them had personal, financial, or political ties to white members of the Board of Trustees.
You don't say. So you're trying to have us believe that there's a bank that colloquially is referred to as the Freedmen's Bank, meaning formerly enslaved for the Negroes.
Yep.
And what had happened was the people who set up the bank were like, things aren't really going great as a savings. We're going to turn it into a commercial bank. And then we're going to give all the loans to the white people.
And they're seeing millions, tens of millions of dollars just sitting in these bank accounts. At its height, the bank had accepted about $57 million in deposits. That's about $1.5 billion today. And if you just kind of stand back and think about that, right? $57 million deposited mostly by the formerly enslaved. These are people who were born in slavery, who had their families torn apart by enslavers and slave traders, enslaved women who had their bodies evaluated, and many medical discoveries that we still consider important in gynecology, for example, were experiments done on enslaved women. And so this community of African Americans deposited millions of dollars into this bank. So they weren't lazy. They did, of course, they knew the importance of saving and how to save. They were investing their hard-earned money into this bank. And only 5% of that loan volume went to them. And those were disproportionately Black churches in and around Washington and Baltimore. And so there was an asymmetry here. And those white bank administrators saw these millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts and decided to gamble with them, to invest in unstable securities, to buy illegally stock in railroads, which at this time in 1873 starts to kind of shatter. The bank is trying to weather the Panic of 1873. The first casualty of that, of course, was J. Cook and Company, the famed investment bank. And we learned later in a congressional inquiry that Henry Cook had borrowed probably about $500,000 from the bank. And so we're seeing all of this plunder, we're seeing all of this fraud. And unfortunately, by the beginning of 1874, the bank is on its last legs. And the bank's trustees ask the most famous African-American person in the nation, the most well-recognized African-American person in the world, the most photographed person of the 19th century, to become the president of the bank. And so in March,
Dr. Hill-Edwards, can we get mad at this? I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
I hate to interrupt you. But here's the thing. What often happens in these sorts of schemes, and we see it with John Hope Bryant, is that white capital is like, ooh, we need a Black face on this thing. Who can we go to, right? And white capital finds just the right Black faces to do this thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I know you don't know the man because you've never met him. No. But why did he do this? Why did he accept this position?
Oh, the man is Frederick Douglass, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I know we never met that other man. But anyway, why did Frederick Douglass do this?
That's a great question. I think it's because, for a couple reasons, two main reasons. The one, people around him had been encouraging him to make a foray into politics, to move to a state in the South, a place like Mississippi, for example, to move there to run for a Senate seat. And so he had, I think, political aspirations, and why not, right? He had political aspirations, and he was a supporter of the bank. When he moved to DC in 1871, he buys and publishes the New National Era, a Black newspaper, and each issue he ran an ad or a story about the Freedman's Bank, and he himself was a depositor. So were his sons. And so I really think that he believed that he could redeem the bank's reputation, because by 1874, there were runs on the bank, two examinations from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency had come out, essentially saying that the bank was not being well run. And so I think he really hoped that he could redeem the bank's reputation. But the bank's reputation was at kind of a dire point for a good reason, because the bank was over leveraged. They had loaned out so much money. I think about 85% of the loans at this point were in default. And so white borrowers were choosing to not pay back loans that they know were funded by African-American money. And unfortunately, not even he could right the ship. And so the bank closes for good on July 2nd of 1874. And Douglass is left kind of holding the bag. He realizes quickly that the bank is underwater, and it can't be redeemed, unfortunately.
I also am curious that concurrent with all of this, one of the things that's happening, and we see this history playing out in modern times, is while white people are actually stealing, while white people are actually pillaging from the bank, they are messaging Black people this morality um, attached to saving and financial literacy, really, like don't smoke, don't drink, don't gamble, put your money in the bank like a good person. And so it's so interesting to see that messaging playing out while the people who actually need the message about how to manage money are the people who are telling us that. And so, kind of,
Yeah.
in what role do you think sort of the attachment of morality to savings and morality to working, because one other thing that struck me too that really pissed me off was, I forget who you said it was, but it was the person that was like, the Negro needs to make it on their own and not expect any handout from the government. Like every able bodied Negro needs to be working and know that it is completely unreasonable for them to look to the government to give them anything. And so this like message from the beginning that Black people were sort of looking for a handout, it just really peeves me, because we were the handout. We were the literal handout. Our bodies were the handout. And then for y'all to come back at the end and tell us, um, listen, you got to be upright citizens. The government is not going to make life easy for you. Like, after your labor has built this country, like that is infuriating, especially when you consider how the bank ended and why it closed.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot here to this story, especially one of the concerns that I have about this question of financial literacy. One, I think it's important for a whole variety of reasons. Knowing where your money is going, knowing how investments work, knowing what interest rates mean, like all of that is important, not just for kind of managing your own finances, but for being an upstanding, responsible member of our nation, right? It's important. Sure. But that's only one side of the story, right? Financial literacy is one side of a coin. The other side of a coin is financial inclusion. And that, I think, is what's left out of this conversation, right? And there is a conversation to be had about what happens to African Americans economically, financially after the bank fails, why they retreat from the traditional financial services industry, why they are unwilling to take on the type of risk that may have allowed them to build wealth. But when you have the risk of racial violence, the reality of racial terrorism, the instability of not being able to trust that a financial institution will be a proper steward of your money. I think that is a major part of this story, or a major part of the conversation that is left out when we only focus on financial literacy. And I think that's what we see with the Freedman's Bank. African Americans were quickly absorbing these messages about, yes, the importance of saving. They understood that, but they were still burned in the process. And we see this continue into the late 19th and early 20th centuries with redlining, with the destruction of Black Wall Streets, with then predatory inclusion that we see in the 1960s and 1970s. And so, yes, again, financial literacy is important, but we also have to look at the other side. What are these financial institutions not doing? How are these financial institutions, and how have they taken advantage of the very communities that they claim to serve? That is an important part of the conversation that I think, unfortunately, was left out of your discussion with John Hope Bryant.
And can you also talk a little bit, because I think it's also important. One thing I didn't realize was the chronology of all of this, and how in the short period of Reconstruction, Black people suffered so many losses. And so one of the things I didn't realize was the Special Field Order number 15 about the 40 acres. Yeah. So I always thought that that was an unfulfilled promise, where there was legitimate intention to enfranchise Black people as landowners. I never knew that it was just BS from the beginning. Like that they just never had no intention at all. And so he just talk a little bit about, like not only the loss that happened for people who had deposited in the bank, but people who came and started to work this land that was eventually taken back from them and given back to the white people that were traitors, really. Traitors who fought to try to break the nation apart.
Sure. Well, Special Field Order number 15 was so important in the history of Reconstruction and in kind of African American history writ large. I mean, it was a mandate to redistribute former Confederate land on the Eastern Seaboard to the formerly enslaved. Now, here's the thing. Yes, we could have seen it as a boon, right? But the major goal was to essentially segregate African Americans and to encourage them to live within their own communities outside of white interaction or interference. And so it was essentially a domestic colonization effort. And it was established to essentially cordon off the formerly enslaved from whites. And so that was established under Lincoln. Once Lincoln is assassinated in April of 1865, Andrew Johnson, his vice president, ascends to the presidency. And he is more willing to accept former Confederates back into the body politic. And so he quickly overturned Special Field Order number 15. The African American families who are tilling this land essentially get booted off. And so we might say that Special Field Order number 15 was the federal government's first instance at reparations. But it was quickly overturned when Johnson ascends and says, no, we want to bring former Confederates back into American public life. And so we're going to give them their land back. And that required kicking African Americans off of the land that they had begun to kind of claim for themselves, actually legally under this Special Field Order.
The more you know. I don't understand how we have so many people who are consistently giving these messages of Black people don't want to do anything. We don't want to try. We don't want to build businesses. We don't want to. And if you know just a little bit about history, we've always done, in spite of
absolutely
white racial terror, in spite of a government that does not support our rights, in spite of, we always do. They just always come back and snap that shit back. Like that is the history of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the messages that we have around that pathologize Black people and Black life are just so hurtful. And I'm just like, just a little bit of history, and you wouldn't have the courage to say that.
Yeah.
Because actually, one of the quotes that I love from the book that was from our friend Frederick Douglass is when he said, he was talking about the failure of the bank. Mm-hmm. And he said the failure of the bank wasn't due to the incompetence of colored men, but to the shrewdness and rascality of white men. Yep. And I'm like, if that ain't a word for every era, right? The rascality of white men.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and he was very, very clear about why the bank failed, from plunder of white bank administrators, from white bank administrators wanting African Americans to use the bank in ways that they didn't want to. African Americans wanted to use the bank as a savings bank, essentially what we might consider a checking account. They wanted to put money in the bank. When they had enough money to actually buy what they wanted, which was land, they withdrew money, and that was that. Great, cool. White bank administrators wanted African Americans to leave their money in the bank so that they could make loans to other whites.
Sure.
And so, I mean, a question comes, was the bank designed to succeed, right? I don't think so, especially if you look at it from the perspective of African Americans, and they couldn't have known this. But unfortunately, I think the bank was designed to fail. And as I often say in my own life, institutions and structures work the way that they are designed. So that's how the bank was designed to operate.
So another thing that occurs to me in sort of this current day, like you talked about with the bank's founding, although we can assume that its founder had good intentions, right? But even with if he had good intentions, he partnered with the political elite, the business elite of the time. And as I look at our current political environment, where we have the political elite, the business elite on full display in ways that I think we had, like just out in the open, I think in ways that we haven't seen, at least I haven't seen in a while. Do you see any parallels or not that you have this crystal ball, but are there some things that you might expect to see because these times feel so similar in some ways?
Sure. I am frightened when I hear language about deregulation, especially in certain sectors. I think historically, African Americans have fared better when the federal government is working on our behalf, whether
For
it's in terms
sure.
of civil rights, whether it's in terms of protecting legal rights and privileges, most certainly in terms of our participation in American economic life. And so the creation of financial regulators who are or who have been emboldened to protect consumers, I think is a great thing. When I hear about a presidential administration wanting to chip away at that, my kind of flag goes up because I constantly think about times historically when that has happened and disproportionately African Americans are left to suffer.
Well, there you have it. Amber, did you have any parting questions for Dr. Hill-Edwards?
No, I do just want to say though that I don't know if you did this on purpose, but I felt like the end of your book was a chef's kiss, where you just sort of give a big F you to the myth of generational wealth and kind of this idea that we haven't been able to pass anything along to our families because of us. And I just thought that the example that you end the book on with is so powerful because those messages are strong and they reverberate deeply, and people internalize a lot of shame around their financial positions in this society. And I just love how you ended the book in a way that connects the messages that we're still getting today with the same struggle we were in over 200 years ago. And so I just want to applaud you because I don't think we talk nearly enough about how these are recycled messages and how if we just took a look back, we could see that they are passing along. So bravo to you. I love that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
And we just appreciate you coming to join us to talk about the past, but like we've said, talking about like today at the same time. Because I think the Freedmen's Bank gives us such an example of all of these things that are in the popular discourse and all of these structures and institutions that are around us. And so thank you so much for that. How do people find you? How do they find the book and how do they find you?
You can find the book at any bookseller, and you can find me at JusteneHill-Edwards.com.
I know that's right. Like, just look or Google me.
Or Google me. That works.
Well, Dr. Hill-Edwards, thank you so much for coming on Brokish. And hopefully this won't be the last time. Hopefully we'll see
I
you
look
again
forward to the next time. I want to hear more about this chutney.
I'm gonna send you the recipe directly.
Okay, cool.
So Amber, you got some homework for the brokers?
Listen, I know y'all, it's the holidays, people are busy, but I really encourage you all to buy the book and read it. It's an easy read, and I don't mean easy in the terms of like, smut, but it doesn't read so difficult or so academically that it's hard. I read it in a couple days, and I would just encourage you all. It's such a good book to read and get centered on, who our people are and how strong and resilient we are. So that's gonna be the homework. But I'm trifling like y'all, so I'm not gonna check and see if you did it. But honor code, hashtag honor code.
Honor code, girl, please. So, y'all know, we know that slavery was a long time ago, but the collapse of so many institutions erected during Reconstruction for our wealth and well being created the foundation for this situation that we find ourselves in today. And Black people have always been adept with money and finding creative solutions to financial problems. So, it's really irresponsible and hurtful to paint the picture that it's our lack of discipline and hustle that created poor outcomes like the racial wealth gap. If we don't take anything else away, it should be that we have always tried to find a way to achieve self-determination. And white capitalist terrorists are always happy to meet us with the law and violence to ensure it doesn't endure. But despite that, y'all, we persist. Thanks for tuning in. We look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of Brokish.
All right, good people. Thanks for listening to Brokish. For more episodes, visit us at brokish.com or subscribe, and Brokish will get direct deposited into your favorite podcast app on the 1st and 15th. Share Brokish with your friends and join the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Music for Brokish is Come Get Some by Blank and Kit. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.